Okay, good morning again. We're really getting towards the end of the Perek and to the end of the Masechta. In fact, I would plan to finish the Masechta, or at least up to the final line or two, next week rather than this week. Otherwise, we'd have to make a little bit of a dash. And I have in mind what we might learn next, unless people want to take a permanent break. And that would be a Perek in Yuma, which is to do with the fasting on Yom Kippur and has various interesting inyonim in it as well. But we're almost finished Masechet Sukkah. And I think we had reached a Mishnah, which is the final Mishnah as well, on Nun Vav Amud Aleph, 56a. It's about 10 lines from the bottom. There's a big Mem Tov Nun Yud at the end of that line. And then the Mishnah starts, Yom Tov HaSamach L'Shabbos. So that will be the Mishnah we'll start in a few moments. Just a very little reminder of what we did last week, which originally ties in with this Mishnah, but then we moved into other things. So last week's discussion was on the other things. We had a question raised as to, on the first night of Sukkot, whether you make your Shechiyonu before the Leishef HaSukkah, whether you make the Leishef HaSukkah before the Shechiyonu. There was a whole long Shatla and Tari on the Gemara on it. And the basic question was, when you have two opposing principles, which of those opposing principles wins out? And on the first night of Sukkot, you had the opportunity of saying a Shechiyonu, and the Shechiyonu, you say it for every Chag, and therefore the question is, do you say it before the bracha Leishef HaSukkah on the grounds of the principle Tadir v'she'eno Tadir Kodem, that one normally places first the mitzvah which is more frequent. And in this case, it's the bracha that's more frequent. Shechiyonu is said on many occasions, whereas the Leishef HaSukkah is only said on the festival of Sukkot. So from the perspective of Tadir, we should say the Shechiyonu first. On the other hand, the main mitzvah of the day, the Chovat Hayom, the main mitzvah of the day, is sitting in the Sukkah. And therefore, there's an argument to say that it should be the highlight of the day that takes first position in the Seder of Brochos. And therefore, we should say Leishef HaSukkah before Shechiyonu. The Gemara concluded that the halacha was first you say the Leishef HaSukkah and then the Shechiyonu. In other words, in this situation, we don't go with Tadir, we don't go with giving precedence to the more frequent mitzvah, but rather we go with giving more preference to the mitzvah, which is the highlight of the day. And on the Sukkot, it is sitting in the Sukkah. Shechiyonu is a general mitzvah, a bracha you say when a new Yontif comes in, and is not specific to Sukkot. So that's the material we discussed towards the end of last week's Shir. We now reach a new Mishnah. And as I say, this new Mishnah is tied in with some of the discussions we had before. We talked about the Lechem HaPonim. We talked about the Mishmarot HaKohanim. Remember, we spent quite a few shiurim actually discussing the 24 family groups of Kohanim who on a rota basis would perform their service in the Beis HaMikdash. There were 24 such mishmoros, and they were mentioned by name. The family names were mentioned in Divrei Hayomim. And those names survived for another 1,000 years or more in terms of the Kohanic rota, continued to be called after those family names. And in discussion of those rotas, the Mishnah also mentioned the din vis-a-vis the Lechem HaPonim. The Lechem HaPonim was the showbread that was placed on the Shulchan and was refreshed, renewed every Shabbos. And on the Shabbos, there would be two groups of Kohanim. This was the opportunity for the changing of the guard between the Mishmar for the past week, which was coming to an end, that family's rota, and incoming was the rota family for the week to come. And they would meet and shake hands, so to speak, and they would do so, if you like, over the Lechem HaPonim. That was the actual point of transition. And you had the new bread being brought in by the new mishmar, and the old bread being taken out by the old mishmar, and they would meet and they would divide up the two sets of mishmarot. Those two groups would divide up the old bread and eat it between them. It was available for the Kohanim to eat. The new bread is placed on the table and is there for another week, and no one touches it. The showbread is only eaten when it's a week old, so to speak. And the Chazal tell us that the bread always remained fresh the whole week. So even when it was taken off the show table, because it had had its week, it was fresh. It would be divided between the incoming mishmar and the outgoing mishmar. So if you like, two sets of Kohanim, which could have been quite a lot of Kohanim, all having a small fragment of the Lechem HaPonim as a matona to them for the efforts that they put into the running of the Beis HaMikdash. So that's how we understood the situation for Lechem HaPonim on a normal Shabbat. Now, the Mishnah is going to take us into a few situations which are not quite as straightforward, although the logic of it remains reasonable, where there is a Shabbat in which the numbers of mishmaros are not just the two mishmaros, the ingoing and the outgoing, but because Shabbos is so proximal, it's so close to Yom Tov, there is the other 22 mishmaros are still also, or some of them, may still be in the Beis HaMikdash because they haven't had an opportunity to go home or because they had to come in early. So what happens in terms of dividing the Lechem HaPonim on a Shabbat, which is so close to Yom Tov that in fact it's not just those two mishmarot, the ones that would normally come in and the ones that would normally go out, but also all the other mishmarot are still there. How is that divided? So here we will deal with the Mishnah and take it through. So the Mishnah starts, Yom Tov hasamach leShabbos, a Yom Tov which is near to Shabbos, adjacent to Shabbos in terms of days of the week, bein milfoneha, whether it's adjacent because it comes, the Yom Tov falls just before Shabbos, or bein la'achreha, or whether it falls just after it, hayu kol hamishmaros shavos bechiluk lechem haponim. All the mishmaros that were there all together would share in the lechem haponim. Now the Mishnah's wording here isn't clear. What does it mean before and after? And the Gemara essentially gives some sense into it. So I'll provide the solution of the Gemara, which is the obviously correct solution, even though the wording of the Mishnah is a bit misleading. So the Mishnah is talking about two potential situations. And in fact, you can look at it as what we have this year, where you have Shavuos falling on Friday. And here we are in Eretz Yisrael. Shavuos is only one day anyway. And then you have Shabbos immediately after. So here you have a Yom Tov beginning and ending adjacent to Shabbos. It begins on Friday and it ends on Friday. And then there's Shabbos. So this is the example of Yom Tov falling and finishing just before Shabbos. Shabbos is an ordinary Shabbos. However, who are we going to have in the Beis HaMikdash on the Shabbos? Well, on that Shabbos, if it had been an ordinary Shabbos, we would just have the normal rota of the incoming family group and the outgoing family group who are finishing their stay, just two mishmarot. However, since Friday, just before Yom Tov, Shabbos, is a Yom Tov Shavuos, remember the rule that on the Chag, all 24 groups of Kohanim were present. On most Chagim, there were many more Karbonos, so that was the reason for it. Not just the rota one coming in, the rota one going out, but also all the other 22. The whole Kohanic regiment of Klal Yisrael was there. So, since Shabbos follows Yom Tov, it's clear that the Kohanim who were there on the Friday, and they were all there together, can't travel back to their homes on the Shabbos. So they're all going to be there, whether they like it or not. So that's a situation where Yom Tov starts and ends before Shabbos. All the groups are there, and the Mishnah said that the Lechem HaPonim is divided between all 24 groups. That just means everyone gets a very, very much smaller part of the lechem upon him. In practice, they only need to have a kazayas each. They don't have to have more than a kazayas, an olive size, and they're already yotzeh the mitzvah of eating from the lechem upon him. I mean, they may not be satisfied in terms of having satiated their stomachs, but the mitzvah of eating lechem upon him is only with a kazayas. So even though there may be 24 groups there, 2 who are rightfully there and 22 who are delayed going home because Yom Tov fell the day before, all 24 get to divide lechem upon him equally, because it's not the fault of the 22 who are still there. Why shouldn't they also have a chelek? They had no opportunity to leave the Beis HaMikdash because Shabbos was immediately there when Yom Tov went out. The other case is very simply just the converse case. Suppose that Shavuos had come in on the Sunday, if it could. Yes, and you have Shabbos the day before. Again, Shabbos is an ordinary Shabbos, but Yom Tov follows immediately. There also, on the Shabbos, you would have all 24 groups there already there. Why? Because again, you would have the 2 who need to be there on the Shabbos, but since Yom Tov is coming the day after Shabbos, Yom Tov is on Sunday, all the other 22 mishmaros would have arrived on Friday, because they can't arrive just to do their Yom Tov work on Sunday. They'd have to travel on a Shabbos, not allowed to. So all, again, in this situation, in both bookend cases around Shabbos, all 24 groups of Kohanim are going to be there. And the Mishnah says that we give them all an equal share in the lechem upon him. Okay, very democratic so far. Nothing very surprising once we've understood the cases. The Mishnah goes on to say, Chal liyos yom echad lahafsik binotayim, if there was a week, one single weekday in between Shabbos and Yom Tov on either case, in other words, if Shavuos had been Thursday and then there was a weekday Friday, they could go home on Friday, or if Yom Tov Shavuos was not on the Sunday, but it was on the Monday. So the incoming Kohanim, the 22 other groups, could actually arrive on the Sunday. In other words, there was an available travel day, and the extra groups of Kohanim were not forced actually to be there over Shabbos. They could have come on an available weekday. Then, in this situation, there is a different division. So here the Mishnah says, if there was at least one weekday in which those extra 22 mishmaros could go home or could travel on, then we say, Mishmar shezamano kavua hayonotel esechalos v'hamis akev notel shtayim. The language here is not very good because it's a bit misleading. It seems as though you've only got one misakev. What that means over here is that the 2 mishmaros for whom it was their rota in this situation would actually be allowed to share between those 2 mishmaros 10 loaves out of the 12 loaves of the lechem upon him, and the extra 22 groups, or however many did not go home or didn't want to travel on the available weekday, they would only be able to share in 2 loaves. The 12 would be divided not 6-6 but 10-2. Why is that? Because in this situation, the Kohanim, the extra Kohanim, could have traveled on that available weekday, either before the Yom Tov, before Shabbos or after Shabbos, but they didn't. They wanted to remain behind a bit longer. So we're saying, well, we're not going to be quite as generous to you. So they're only going to have those who decided not to avail themselves of that single travel day that was available to them halachically, will have to share and each take a very much smaller portion. You would have to, you would have up to 22 groups of Kohanim all having to take their share of only 2 loaves. I mean, we saw those loaves were pretty big. We're not really talking about a baby challah. We're talking about a very large Sheva Brachos type challah that would probably be the size of the each lechem upon him loaf. Okay, and that's what the Mishnah means here, where it says the mishmash is a manu kavua, the 2 which have the normal, doesn't mean the mishmar, the 2 mishmaros that normally have their rota to come in and out on the Shabbos. They hoyonotel esechalos, they take 5-10 loaves. Hamis akev, the ones that just decided to remain behind and not travel, they're the ones who would take 2. Ubish'ar Yemos Hashanah. Now, the Mishnah leaves to the end the most obvious and simple case, which is the one we always come in on, so to speak. An ordinary Shabbos, no Yontif before, no Yontif after, the regular bog standard Shabbos, where all the only two mishmoros of the Beis Hamikdash will be the incoming one for the week and the outgoing one. The Mishnah mentions this standard case, if you like, last. Uvish ayamos hashana hanichnas notel sheish and hayotze notel sheish. This is the sharing that we talked about of the two groups of Kohanim who have their rota either finishing or starting. Everything is divided equally. So essentially each group gets six for the incoming, 6 for the outgoing. Now that's the standard halacha as we understand it. However, we have a machlokas here in the Mishnah. The Gemara is going to ask why the next Tana takes a different opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Hanichnas notel sheva and hayotze notel chomesh. Interestingly enough, he says there is an unequal distribution of the chalos between the incoming set of Kohanim, the incoming mishmar, and the outgoing mishmar. And the Gemara is going to ask questions as to why that is the case. What is Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning? But at this point, he's giving precedence to the incoming group, giving them more to eat, if you like, of the 12, 7/12ths, whereas the same number of Kohanim possibly who are leaving, this is their last day, they're only going to get 5/12ths. And this is the opinion only of Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara will discuss what his rationale is. Now, let's carry on. Hanichnasin cholkin batzofon. Those who are entering. Now, this is another detail. Where do they eat their lechem haponim? And we'll see that the two groups, whether you say 6/6 or 7/5, they have different rules as to where they do their eating. You know, it's like when you have a school, you have the junior school has one playground and the senior school has another playground. Well, we're going to deal with these Kohanim almost the same way. The Mishmar HaNichnas, the incoming group who are starting on this Shabbos, they will eat they will be cholkin, they will divide up and eat their lechem haponim, but sophon in the north. We'll have a look and see what north and south means in a moment. But hayotze in, those who leave, those who are in their last day, this Shabbos is the end of their role of duty, and they're going to eat their lechem haponim distribution. Badorom, they're going to do so in the south of the Azara. And as Rashi explains, as we see later on also in various places, not all parts of the Beis HaMikdash area had equal status or standing, if you like. I mean, there was a direction of the Beis HaMikdash which was preferred and which was used for the holiest korbanos, and there was the other direction which was not quite as used for holiest korbanos. In our before Pesukei Zimra, we talk about Kodshe Kadoshim, Shchitoson, Bat Sophon, etc. So there's Sophon and there's Dorom. And the most preferred korbanos, the shchita of those korbanos was in the north of the Azara. So let me just share my screen with you for a moment. I'm not going to show you any shchita, don't worry about it. I've pretty gruesome stuff. So go away, Microsoft. What's this silly thing? I've got a Microsoft stuff over here. 1 second. Now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to have to go and kill. I can't kill that. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm going to share screen again. Hopefully I destroyed the obstacle. Okay, so we are over here and screen sharing. Let me just make this one bigger. You remember this famous picture. This is a bird's eye view a helicopter's eye view from the top of the Beis HaMikdash. And here's the Ezras Noshim in various. This is a large area, but it looks very small. Sorry. They come up the steps over here and into the main part of the Beis HaMikdash. Here's the Heichal from on top, the huge building, the sanctuary. Over here's a Kodesh Kadoshim in the center. That's an Aron. There's another chamber over here where the menorah and everything is. Here's the opening. There's large doors. Over here is the Mizbeach. This is outside now. Obviously, all this building is an inside building. And here's the Mizbeach, the altar. And here's some areas, we'll see what role they play later on, where the shechita is done for the animals, which are going to be part of it, at least, depending upon the type of carbon, brought up the ramp of Mizbeach and burnt on the Mizbeach. Now, if you read these directions, Tzafon over here, Dorom over here, that's north here, that's south. Since we have a rule that Kodesh Kodashim Shkitosan Batzofim, you may only shecht the holiest of holy korbanos in the north, that means that, that means that when the korbanos were shechted, the most holy korbanos, it was in this part of the Azara. And where some of the other korbanos were shechted was more in this part. There doesn't seem to be a lot of room, I always thought. It must be quite cramped. But in any case, this section, the left section as you see it, is the more holy part of the Azara because it's reserved for the higher level korbanos. And that's where the Mishmar HaNichnas, the incoming group, would apportion and eat their lechem aponim, whereas the group going out would be sitting over here, rather than have separate seats over here and separate over seats. A division of the eating here as well. And the idea was to afford a higher level of kovod to those coming in than those leaving. You might think it's a bit unfair. Maybe it's a sort of way of bribing people. You're going to be here a whole week now. You know, we're going to treat you nicely. You can eat your lechem aponim here in the more sacred parts of the Azara, and those leaving will be over here. So that's one possible interpretation. It's not clear why, otherwise that should be the case. But we're affording pride of place to those who are just coming in and giving them a more honourable place in Korban. Sorry? Was that you, Tommy?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. It's okay. I didn't actually
no, it's all right.
Mute everyone. Everyone's been so well behaved that I haven't even muted everyone. Let me just carry on. So that's the reason that the incoming group are eating over here and the outgrown group are eating their lechem aponim over here. They don't take it out. It's very clear. You're not allowed to take the lechem aponim out. You can't just take it out of the Beis HaMikdash and eat it in, you know, in a hotel or something, or certainly not take outside of Yerushalayim, not even outside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash. They would eat it in the Azara because it had a high level of Kedusha. Okay, now the Mishnah carries on, says some interesting things. The Mishnah carries on. Let me just stop sharing for a moment. I'm just going to. Okay, so the Mishnah carries on towards the end, telling us something very intriguing, which we won't get to the bottom of until we've gone through a little bit more Gemara. But let's try and see what the Mishnah teaches us before getting into any level of detail. Bilga, le'olam cholekes badorom. The group called Bilga, we will see who they are later on, always divided and ate its lechem aponim in the south, in the less honored position, even when they were the group who were coming in. And I'll just carry on to the end of the Mishnah, and then we'll see what it's all about. Furthermore, when it comes to Bilga, the tabata, its rings, the rings that were assigned to Bilga, the group called Bilga, kavua, they were fixed into the ground. Furthermore, the chalona and its window, satuma, was closed up. Very strange, isn't it? The Gemara is going to explain later on, without me going into the details now, that the group, the Mishmar Bilga, had upset the Beis HaMikdash, and as a result, that group was penalized. It was sanctioned. It wasn't forbidden to carry out the avodah and to have other privileges, but it was openly, if you like, shown a lower level of respect than all the other groups. So this group Bilga, as being described over here, was sanctioned in various ways that we will understand when we look into the details of what we mean over here. The first thing we understand, cholekes badorom. That means no matter whether they were the incoming or the outcoming group, They were always forced to eat theirs in the south. So that's the first piece of humiliation. We normally say the incoming group eats in the north, but if they were an incoming group, they would eat in the south. So they would eat in the south with those who were the outgoing group. No one would be eating in the north, and everybody would say, hey, why isn't Bilgar eating in the north? And everybody would say it's because they've been sanctioned. So essentially, it was a public humiliation for Bilgar. How long that lasted, I don't know. But this was a sanction placed on them for whatever problems they introduced the Beis HaMikdash, which we'll see as we get through the Gemara. Let me just take you again to share, because this is interesting. Right. If you remember, I showed you this, all the names of the various Mishmaros. These were taken from Divrei Hayomim, their names, Yehoyariv, Yodaya, Chorem. There were 24 Mishmaros, 24. Each line represents details about one of the Mishmaric groups. If you take the first, for example, here's the name, Yehoyariv. Their nickname, they had nicknames, don't ask me why, Misarbi Meron. And where did they come from? They came from Iran. And Yedaya came from Tzipori. Their nickname was Tziporim. Maybe you can see the similarity. So each Mishmar came from a different town. These are each of the family groupings of Kohanim, of the 24, that would have had their Rota Shabbat. And guess what? As we get towards the middle, number 15 is Bilgar. So this Bilgar doesn't appear out of nowhere in the Mishnah. It is one of the 24 Mishmarot, and they came from a place called Ma'ar. I'm not quite sure where Ma'ar is. Their nickname was Ma'adya. They're group number 15. So this particular group was sanctioned for reasons we will see later on. And the first sanction was Cholekes Badorom, that they had to divide and eat their Lechem Haponim in the south rather than in the north, even if they were the incoming group for the week. Okay. The next thing was the Tabata Kavua. The Mishnah said that their ring was fixed in place. What does that mean? So let me go back up again to this picture. Everything I show you here is always interconnected. Isn't it wonderful? Yeah. Everything can be seen from anywhere. It's like a hologram. So if you look again at this whole picture here of the Beis HaMikdash and the Azora, where the actual activities took place, here's the Mizbeach again. Where did they shecht the animals? They shechted the animals. Well, they shechted the animals. They shechted. They had rings to restrain the animals over here. If you count these little blobs, there are 24 of them, and then over here there are probably 24 tables or something like that. One for each. There's one ring. 6 by 4 or 4, yeah, it's 4 by 6, 6 horizontally and 4 vertically. Each of these are rings. When I say rings, I mean they are large rings with both with ends fixed, embedded into the ground, the soil of the Mizbeach. 24 of them. Each ring was the possession, if you like, of one Mishmar. So if a Mishmar was going to try and restrain an animal, it would do so using the ring that was allocated to it. It's like having 24 car parking spaces with your names on. Yeah, you wouldn't park in somebody else's car parking space, God forbid. So nobody would use somebody else's ring. You had a ring. Bilgar's ring was concreted into place so they couldn't use it. Interestingly enough, here I thank ArtScroll for a diagram. Well, I got this from a Hebrew ArtScroll. Here they're showing you what the rings look like from close up. Now, here you have a ring which is closed, which means if you can imagine this is the ground level, the line, then the head of the animal would have been put in here. First, during the open position, this is the ring in open position, the head of the animal, and then it was able to rotate in a circular channel. You can see the channel underground. And when they rotated it into this position, the animal was fixed into place and couldn't move. So it was restrained and then the shechita could take place. So these were specific rings to restrain the animals, and they would be able to rotate and click into place, and then the animal could be restrained. However, the ring of Bilgar was glued, concreted, so it was always into this position, and you couldn't get an animal's head into it. It's a way of saying if you were in a car park and there was a car park place assigned to you, and someone decided you don't deserve it, they would put a concrete block on that car park place and you would never be able to move your car there. So Bilga would not have a place of its own to shecht. So what would it do? It would have to ask another group if it could use its ring, because it also was it was doing avodah, nevertheless, it wasn't prevented. So this was another sanction that the ring, which had its name on, so to speak, had been concreted into place as a sanction against it for its misdemeanors, which we'll read about later on. So that's the tabata kavua. And the final thing the Mishnah says, v'chalona stuma, its window was closed. Now this is very interesting because there's a difference in opinion of what this means. By the way, this description of a rotating ring, which can rotate to a closed position or can be in an open position, is given by Rashi. So this diagram isn't an Art Scroll original, but it's nice to see the picture. Okay. Here again, you see, I'm just showing you the same outline as before. The only thing is it highlights something a little bit better that the diagram I showed you before doesn't show. Again, here's the Mizbeach, and here are some of the rings, and here's the Heichal from on top, a nice pale blue color. The Mishnah said to us that a third sanction was that Bilga's chalona was stuma, its window was closed. So here we have a machlokas rishonim. What does that mean? What do you mean its window was closed? Where are they windows that these Kohanim used to work with? They worked outside, They worked in the Azora. Some of them were privileged to go into the Heichal, but they didn't have their own huts with windows in them. So therefore, the commonest explanation which Rashi brings, it's referring to windows which were more like lockers. The window wasn't a window, it was a locker in the wall. What was kept in those lockers in the wall? The chalifot, the shechita knives. In other words, each of the 24 mishmaros had their own locker. Isn't that nice? Sounds like you might have at shul, where they kept whatever they needed, their own tools. They didn't borrow tools from some gemach in the Beis HaMikdash. They all had their own tools, whatever it is they needed for their Kohanic duties. And each had their own locker. And where were those lockers? So here's the Heichal. You imagine this building. Here there's like an entrance hall. You walk in through here, through great doors, and this is an area inside. However, at the side of these two walls, here and here, where you see the blue, they were chambers. And you could, from the outside, you could open a locker and you could take out what you need. So they were like storage lockers, machsanim, which they would come into. They were called the Beit HaChalifot, the place in which the Khalifa knives were kept. That's according to Rashi and some other explanations. Bilga had its own labeled locker, but guess what? It had been glued shut by the management of the Beis HaMikdash, so it lost that privilege. And each time it needed to find a tool for the purposes of avoda, would have to go to the other group who happened to be in the Beis HaMikdash and said, could you lend us please a Khalifa knife or whatever it is, because we can't get into ours. Our locker has been sealed. That was a third sanction. Again, all these were meant to be, in a sense, visual, almost demonstrations that of the sanctions against Bilga. The ultimate sanction would be, say, you can't perform the service at all in the Beis HaMikdash. They were not sanctioned in that way at all. They were simply sanctioned that they were given a position of somewhat a humiliating exposure, so other groups could see how they were treated, and that was to teach them a lesson. Did they learn their lesson? I don't know. So this is the explanation, by the way, of Rashi and many other Mefarshim. Now, the Meiri takes a completely different explanation. And he says, what's chalona stuma? Chalona is a window. Chalona isn't a locker in the side of a building. Where do we get this imaginative idea that we're talking about the lockers at the side of the Heichal where the shechita knives were kept? So he actually suggests, and I don't really understand him very well, he says that around the Azara here, This is not an enclosed area, but there are walls, and the walls had various windows. And for one, I can't understand this very well, but there was a window assigned, if you like, to look out and to look in. People could look into the Azora and see what was going on, and it admitted light into the Azora from the walls, not just from on top, but from the walls. And the place at which Bilga would do their avodah, that window was blacked out, so that people could not see them doing the avodah, and they couldn't get the light from the outside. Again, what kind of sanction is this? Again, meant to be some sort of humiliation. People would know that's the window of Bilga, and Bilga is essentially being shielded from view. People don't want to see that when they're doing the avodah. That's Samiri. I'm not sure I like that explanation very much either, but at least it translates the word chalon, as a window, and not as a storage box or machsan, which is the other explanation. Okay, so these were the various sanctions that were put into place against the Mishmar Bilga. I'm going to stop sharing now. We go back and we're going to start the Gemara. So the Gemara says, the Gemara is going right back, not to Bilga. It's going right back to the information we were told at the beginning of the Mishnah, which is that if Shabbos immediately followed Yom Tov, like it does this year, where Shabbos follows Shavuos, or it immediately precedes Yom Tov if Shavuos had been on Sunday, and therefore inevitably the other 22 Mishmoros who were going to serve on Yom Tov were still going to be in the Beis HaMikdash over Shabbos because they didn't have an opportunity to go home, or because they wouldn't have been able to travel on Shabbos, and Yom Tov was the next day. Yom Tov was on Sunday, so they had to come on Friday. Whichever way round, they're going to be inevitably detained in the Beis HaMikdash, that they get to share with the two other groups who are normally there. They get to share the lechem haponim. Now, the Mishnah used some very strange language. We don't have to get into this, but I explained to you the case. But if you read the Mishnah and translate it literally, it doesn't mean that at all. So the Gemara, first of all, says, what do we mean in the beginning of the Mishnah, even though you now know what it means? My milfaneha. What do you mean if Shabbos is before or after? If you want to say, does it mean that the first day of Yom Tov was before Shabbos, and Shabbos was the second day of Yom Tov, for example, and you say that, or you want to say Achreha means that Shabbos was the sixth day of Yom Tov, and the seventh day of Yom Tov came afterwards. If that's what it means, that would be a better translation rather than the way I translate. Hailu Shabbos Shabbos. It would turn out that Shabbos is during Yom Tov. Yes, not immediately before or immediately after. So it can't mean that. Ela lefoneha Yom Tov Acharon. The last day of Yom Tov is on Friday. Ula and the case of Achareha is Yom Tov Rishon. That means the day after Shabbos. That means that Yom Tov is the day after Shabbos is on Sunday. That's essentially exactly what we said. The Gemara is only confirming that the case in the Mishnah is where Shabbos is Shabbos. It isn't Yom Tov, but it's either the day following Yom Tov or it's the day preceding Yom Tov. And there we said that there was an equal division. Okay. So the Gemara asks, my Tama, what is the reason? What is the reason for what? That all the groups in such a situation divide equally the lechem haponim. If you think about it again, that seems a little bit unfair. Really, there are only two groups that formally have their rota on a Shabbos. That is the Mishmar HaNichnas, the group that are just coming in to spend the next week in the Beis HaMikdash, and the Mishmar HaYotze, those that are just ending their stint. The handover, if you like, is on that Shabbos. So they have to be there. And normally, on a very ordinary Shabbos, they would divide all the lechem haponim between them, just those two. Now there are another 22 groups detained. We're saying those other 22 also get a chelek. Aren't they getting a chelek? They're getting a chelek. I mean, it's nice to offer them, but aren't they getting a chelek which is not formally due to them because they only there on the Shabbos because they're detained, they can't travel. They're not there because it's their rota day. You're taking away from the rota Kohanim and giving it away to those people who just happened to be spending the time there because they couldn't go home. So the Gemara says, Kivan dahani mekadmi, vahani meachari, tiknun rabbanon milsa ki heichi denechlu bahadi hadodi. It's a the answer is just a very most obviously straightforward answer, but it sounds as though it's a bit more complicated looking in the words. The Gemara is simply saying that since there is no alternative, the group that comes early, let's say Yom Tov's on a Sunday, and Shabbos comes before Yom Tov, therefore, the group who are coming in had to travel on the Friday. It was not therefore they didn't decide to come early just in order to take away the chelek of the lechem aponim of the two rota groups. They didn't. They had no alternative but to be there over Shabbos. They had nothing else they could have done. They had to come early. So you can't deny them the rights to eat properly in the Beis Hamikdash. And similarly, those who left late, in other words, we had, as we have this year, Friday's Yom Tov and Shabbos, then follows by Shabbos. The groups, the 22 groups who were there on extra groups who were there on Friday had no choice to go home on the Shabbos. They had to wait to Sunday. So they're also inevitably and unavoidably detained. So Chazal said, since they're going to be there, and there's no way that they wouldn't be there, let them all eat together. In other words, this is a socially nice thing to do. You're right. They don't have a formal right to eat from the lechem haponim because they're not the formal rota groups for the week, but they have an informal right given to them by the sages because they had no alternative but to be there. Okay. So the Gemara goes on to quote the Mishnah, Chal Yom Echad, if it's actually referring to the end of the Mishnah, because even though the Gemara is quoting Chol Yom Echad, the Gemara's question now is going to be on Rabbi Yehuda. We said that on normal Shabbos, the Mishnah said, on a normal Shabbos, no Yom Tov before, no Yom Tov after, it's divided equally, the Lechem Aponim, between the two groups. 6 of the 12 loaves, if you like, goes to the Nichnasin, and 6 goes to the Yotzin. We said they eat them in different places. That's what the Mishnah said. Then came along Rabbi Yehuda, and he had this strange division. He gave 7 to the incoming group and 5 to the outgoing group, which is not an equal division. And the Gemara now is asking on this, and you can only tell when you read the words because it's not introduced properly. The Gemara says, and here we move to the top of Nun Beis Vavam Lebeis, if you've got a new sheet or turn over the sheet. Vahani Tarti, says the Gemara, those 2 loaves extra that Rabbi Yehuda is giving to the incoming group, Maya Viditaihu. Why? What's the point of giving them that? For what reason do they deserve just one second, do they deserve 2 extra? According to Rabbi Yehuda, incoming group gets 7, outgoing group gets 5. For what reason? Gemara says they're both there as part of their rota duties on that day. The incoming group have arrived, and we will see later on that they start to do korbanos from about midday onwards. The outgoing group did all the morning stuff of korbanos and everything. They are literally, it's like a relay. When they pass on the baton, that's at the lechem haponim. For what reason do we afford more loaves to the incoming group than the outgoing group? That's the Gemara's question. It's a straightforward question. What's wrong with 6-6? Why go for 7-5? So the Gemara answers, this itself is a difficult answer to understand. It's not clear. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So Rabbi Yitzchak responded, Bischa hagofas de losos. They're given this extra privilege, the incoming group, because they are going to close the doors, stop up literally means, close the doors of the Beis Hamikdash in the evening. When everything had been done, the Beis Hamikdash wasn't left, open for people to walk in and out all night. the doors were closed. In the morning, let's see this in context because it's not going to make sense. In the morning, it's the outgoing group, the ones who are going to leave. They're the ones who are doing the stuff in the morning. They're working through the morning and then they go home. So in the morning, they open the doors of the Beis Hamikdash. The outgoing group, they're still in there for another few hours. They open the doors of the Beis Hamikdash. When they leave, let's say in an ordinary-ish, when they leave and they do normal duties at midday or whatever, when the Lechem Aponim is divided, the incoming group take over. They're going to close the doors in the evening. The outgoing group aren't there anymore. It's only the incoming group there for the rest of the week. And over here, Rabbi Yitzchak says, you know what? The outgoing group don't deserve as much for their service for that day, because they're not going to close the doors in the evening, because that's not their function. Who's going to close the doors in the evening? The incoming group, because they're in place from then. That seems a bit of a strange thing, because who opened the doors in the morning? The outgoing group. Isn't it 50-50? It's quits. I mean, does that mean they should get 7 just because they close up? They're the other side. The outgoing group can argue, we opened up and you didn't open up. So it doesn't seem to make very much sense. So this is the problem. We'll see in a moment, as the Gemara is going to say, this is not a relevant question. The question I've just asked, hey, why don't the outgoing group saying, we opened up in the morning? Because they're alternating. 1 week in the rota, it's going to turn out that the group who are outgoing this week will be maybe the next week or in a few weeks' time an incoming group, and then they're going to get the 7. So over time, the 7s and the 5s will average out, will even out. One group isn't always going to be the outgoing group. At some time, they're going to be the incoming group. So it doesn't really matter to us. We're not going to permanently disadvantage one group against another group. But even so, on the explanation given, even for a specific week, that somehow the people who stop up are doing more work, it's strange. Well, close up, because after all, the guys who in the morning who opened up was the other group. The outgoing group was still in place that morning. So therefore, the Meiri offers an explanation again. He says that it wouldn't make sense just simply to say it's due to the closing of the doors, because the counter argument is that the opening of the doors was done by the other group. So you've got to say somehow that the incoming group and the outgoing group opened the doors together in the morning. What a big fiddle. They both opened the doors in the morning. It wasn't just the outgoing group, and the incoming group are also going to close up in the evening. So it turns out that the lion's share of the opening and the closing was done by the incoming group, and therefore they get 7. It sounds a little bit like, I did a bit more than you, a bit childish over here, but we're trying to afford things fairly, it seems, over here. And for that reason, we will give more to the incoming group because they helped also in the morning. A question's asked against this, that some of you may already be scratching your heads. If you read the various Mishnahs, particularly in Talmud and Midos, you see very clearly that the group of people assigned with opening and closing gates, one of their main tasks was the Leviim, not the Kohanim. The Leviim were the gatekeepers. They were the Shoarim. They were the gatekeepers. So what are we doing over here? Saying that, well, the incoming group are doing opening up and or closing down, and the outgoing group, and it's not them. It's their brethren, the Leviim. They're not part of these 24 Mishmoros. They actually were 24 Mishmoros, maybe of Leviim as well, but they're not the Kohanim. They're not the ones who are getting the Lechem upon him. The Leviim are a different group, entirely got different job descriptions. So therefore, the answer they give is that it seems that there were some gates only, which the Kohanim were in charge of, and not the Leviim. The larger majority of the guarding of the stations, of the gates, opening and closing was done by the Leviim, but there were some that were done by the Kohanim. And over here, when we say that the incoming group gets schar hagofas dalosos, they're closing in the evening, we're referring to those few gates or doors which were the responsibility of the Kohanim and not in the Leviim. Now the Gemara asks the question, I mentioned to you before that, maybe this is not relevant. why the Gemara actually is asking it more against Rabbi Yehuda says 7-5, right? That's 7 for the incoming group, 5 for the outgoing group. For whatever reason, whether you take the Meiri, whether you take it the straightforward explanation because of the closing of the doors. However, the Gemara is going to ask the question, why does Rabbi Yehuda even bother to worry about who's doing a bit more and who's doing a bit less? Let's just accept the fact that maybe the incoming group is doing a bit more and the outgoing group a bit less. But let's just call it quits overall, because in 1 week, a group that this week, the group that is incoming in the following week is going to be the outgoing. And a group that was outgoing and only got 5, the next group will get 7. So why don't we just call it simple and just say 6 each week? So let's see it in the Gemara. And the Gemara puts it in a very cute way. The name alay, dal badal. This, I would translate this. Why do we not just say tit for tat? Dal means less, really. Why don't we just give less against less? In other words, you know it's going to even up over time. You know the guy who's getting 5 this week will get 7 in another week, and the guy who's getting 7 this week is going to get 5 another week. So why not make it 6 against 6 all the time? Because over a span, it's going to give exactly the same outcome as this non-even division gives. So why make life complicated? Actually, my simplest answer is that Judaism is very complicated, but that's not the answer given here by the Gemara. The Gemara wants to know, why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda, he knows it'll even out, why doesn't he even it out straight away every week? And the Gemara answers, Omar Abaye. Again, these are all well-known phrases that we say in English as well, but we'll see what the equivalent is in the Aramaic jargon. So Abaye says, doesn't everyone say Butsina Tava Mikora? What's Butsina Tava Mikora? So we have a bit of a machlokus, exactly what the translations means. So let's say it means a small cucumber now is better than a big one later. What we would say, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. That's exactly what the Gemara intends to say over here. If you offer Rashi says, if you offer a person a choice, this reward, can you wait for reward type question. You can have, I'll offer you a small orange today, but if you wait while it grows a bit more on the tree, you'll have a larger orange in a week's time. Then a person will prefer the smaller orange now, because he's not sure he'll get, he may want a larger orange and it may be worthwhile waiting, but human nature is to want to take something that's available now rather than be hooked on the lure of something more valuable later on. He doesn't know he'll live to see it. He doesn't know the orange won't wilt from the tree. He doesn't know various things. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda recommends giving the 7 on the week in which the person does a bit more, rather than saying, let's even it up overall, instead of 7-5, make it 6-6. But hang on, the guy who's done a bit more says, I want my 7 now. I prefer to have 7 and then 5 than 6 and then 6, because 7 is bigger than 6. So I want my instant reward earlier on. A completely rather vulgar opinion of human nature. This is the way people are. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying, look, if this is the way we reward people in relation to their nature. People don't want to wait. The question is asked, though. The question is asked, surely we're not talking here about oranges growing on trees. Maybe the orange will wilt on the tree. These people, these 24 mishmaros, are on a permanent rota that will go on for the next 100 years. So therefore, why even talk about it? It's not as if there's a chance they're not going to be. Even if they get 5 this week, they will get 7 in a future week, because they're not going to lose their rights to the 7. Their rota's not going to drop off the tree. So why not make it 6 and 6? If you say there is a chance they will never get their 7, okay, I understand. But if we say they're definitely going to get their 7, surely this bird in the hand worth 2 in the bush really isn't a relevant saying. The reason we say a bird in the hand rather than 2 in the bush is because if you put your hand in the bush, you might not be able to find the bird, really, even if it's a bigger bird. But if you know you're going to get the bird and it's a bigger one in the bush, you might want to put your hand in the bush. So why not just make it 6, 6? If they're definitely going to get the 7 in a future occasion, they know it, and they're not going to want to get the 7 today. Funny Gemara, this, isn't it, really? Anyway, so the answer to that probably is that you can never be sure of anything. After all, the Beis Hamikdash, God forbid, could be destroyed. So we may have a Beis Hamikdash this week in my rota. If there's Chorban Habayis between my rota and I've just got 5, I'll never get my 7. Anything's possible. So I may never get my 7. And also, if I'm an individual Cohen, maybe I won't survive. The group of my Mishmar will carry on as long as there's a Beis Hamikdash, but I may not be part of the group for some other reason, or I may be sick. The next time I would have been part of an incoming Mishmar, I may not be able to take my place. I may be sick. So it'll end up, I've got 5, I've got a share of 5, and the next time I'm back in practice again, I'll get another share of 5. So therefore, he says, let's do these things according to the correct order, with the reward matching up with the effort each of us, so that there's no need to wait for what you deserve. You get what you deserve straight away. Rather strange way of explaining the division of 7 and 5. Anyway, I think we'll stop at this point and we'll carry on from Omer Abaye next week. And that might put us to finish the Masechta, and then we'll see what to do. I don't know, people want to take a vacation. We could take a sabbatical, or if we carry on, then we carry on and do a different Perek. You just end the recording.